Then when I went to kindergarten for only 6 months during the summer, that's how kindergartens were then, and I began school at McKinley Elementary School in Tremont, and I think it's still there, and went there halfway through 2nd grade, and Grandpa and his sons bought ranches out in Clover Valley, Nevada. Clover Valley is, if you go to Wells and you look at that mountain range south of Wells, Clover Valley's at the foot of those mountains. And they had bought a Hereford bull. That was the beginning of the cattle business then, away from the dry farm. And moved horses and animals out to Clover Valley. Still quite primitive. The telephone was this wooden box on the wall, and you cranked the numbers of the people you wanted to call. We were 9F16, one long crank, 9F14 and 4 shorts. And it was on a party line, and you heard everybody's ring come through, and everybody heard everything. We had several neighbors who would say, oh, talk to my mother about things that had happened in her conversations because they'd been listening in on the party line. But there was a little run-room school out there, and signal school, and the school teacher boarded with families. And all the other families decided, and this was funny, because they said when we moved, oh, they must be Mormons, they have so many kids. And there were only 4 of us then, but still, the school teacher lived with us. And while she was living with us, there was 4 of us, and only the brother next to me and I were the only ones in that school then. Our family acquired a set of identical twin girls. While they were just babies, they all of a sudden got really, really sick. It was one of those horrible winters that we had in 49 and 50. Couldn't get through on the road. They put my mother and the babies in the pickup truck, pulled the pickup truck down through the fields with the tractor to the highway to take them to the doctor. Now, those were interesting times. And even we had to move the school up to a bunkhouse on our ranch then, because they couldn't get down to the school. The roads were they went down with a sleigh and a team of horses, and the teacher was living with us, so we held school in the bunkhouse on the ranch. Then my parents, high school kids, boarded away from home. There was a dormitory built in town for them to live in, and my parents weren't having any of that, so they spearheaded this drive to consolidate schools. And you know how that goes. People do not like to relinquish what their customs have been, and it was kind of a fight. But we ended up having the school bus and going to school in Wells, and that's where I finished school. Graduated high school there. Oh, high school was fun. I was in all the singing groups. I was in band and orchestra. Was president of the FHA. We were very active in the ward. My dad was on the High Council, and my mom was sick in the State Relief Society. The church was quite small then, out there. Just the oddest little ward building that they'd built. And as I was graduating, they were building a new building, and that's the one they have now, and it's more typical of what the church buildings are now. But it was a tremendous effort because you paid for it. Yeah. At least a percentage of it, the members had to pay for it. And we were a small membership, and that required a lot. My father was done a lot. At that time, it was the largest stake in the church, area-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Went over to Winnemucca, from Jackpot to almost to Ely. That whole northeast corner of Nevada was our stake. And so when my parents traveled with their church jobs, sometimes it was overnight. And stake conference was a celebration because all these kids from everybody else, where else would gather, and we'd have lunch between sessions. And we didn't have seminary. And when I was a senior, they started at no release time in Nevada. It's either early morning or, well, we do it during lunch hour. And my reminiscences of seminary are the smell of tuna fish sandwiches. And we just had a small little group that met at our little ward house, and that's when I began seminary. But we had all those programs for advancing through the young programs. Honor Bee, Maya Joy they were called, and Junior Gleaner and Golden Gleaner. Got all those awards. Probably my closest friend was a year ahead of me. Her dad was the state president. So I always had this LDS influence, even though it was... And my dad was a big BYU sports fan. He listened to every BYU sports thing. And so that's where it seemed like where I ought to be going to school. So I did go to BYU, and I remember as they were driving me to Provo, all the way to Provo, he was explaining 11-man football to me. Because our school was so small, we didn't have 11-man teams. So he's explaining 11-man to me, and of course I'm like, I'm not remembering all this, and so what? So BYU was kind of a shock, because in Wells, I was in high school, I was kind of the big fish in a small puddle. And I get down to BYU, and I'm kind of insignificant in this place. And I lived in the dorms, and I liked it. I liked school. I didn't like science classes. English Lit would have been my major, and I could read and read and read. I loved English. And one day, between classes, I'm sitting in the Smith Family Living Center, waiting till I had to take the hike down to lower campus in the women's gymnasium for the required PE classes. Oh, I did not like volleyball. And there's this bunch of guys sitting behind me talking. And I hear Camas, Utah mentioned, and I thought, oh, Camas. My dad has friends there who registered Herefords too. So I turned around and I said, "Do you guys know Winterton Herefords?" Well, one of them happened to be their nephew, and another one happened to be Jerry. So I visit with them, and then I had to leave them. "Where are you going?" "Oh, I've got a class done on women's lower campus." "I'm going that way. I can take you." Boy, that was sure cool, because that was quite a hike from upper campus clear down to the women's gym. And he just happened to be going that way every one of my gym days. So that's how we met. And he was a senior, I was a freshman. I went back the next fall. That's when we were still on quarters, and he wasn't there. And then after that, my grandparents who lived in Logan said, "Come and live with us in our house. We go to Mesa in the winter. You can just stay in our house, go to Utah State." So I did that for 1 quarter, and then I ran out of money. So I went home to work and lost track of him. He says he wrote, but I don't think he did that. At least not that much. So while this is going on, I go home to work, and during that time, I met this really cool guy. I had watched the agriculture life all my life, and you just pour your heart and soul and every cent you have into it, and some catastrophe can come along, and there's got to be a better, easier way to make a living than this. I'm never going to marry a farmer. I'm going to marry a school teacher. And so this guy that I met, that was kind of his aim, and he was a returned missionary. And anyhow, I returned to Utah, and that kind of ended that romance. Lived with my grandparents in Salt Lake, worked at a library in Sugar House at the Sprague Library. And I enjoyed that. That was a good job. While I was there, my father was killed in an accident on the ranch. And He read about it, or his family did. It was in the Salt Lake papers, because my dad had been the Farm Bureau president and on the school board, and so it made the papers. Well, he was being too fast and in a hurry and careless is what he was doing. The station wagon, the family station wagon, the tailpipes, the exhaust system needed to be worked on. He jacked it up and didn't block it. And they figure what he had done was pulled himself out, hanging onto the axle, and pulled it off the jack onto his chest. And my mother sent my little brother out to find him for breakfast, and he found him. And they just think that the weight of it just thought he couldn't breathe and his heart couldn't beat. But it was in the Salt Lake papers, and he read it. I don't know why he was interested. He took me water skiing. I could not get up on the skis, and I'm mortally afraid of water. He took me tennis playing, and he spent almost the whole time just chasing my ball. He's so athletic. I am so not athletic. I tell our children, if you had any athleticism, it came from your father, not from me. And anyhow, but I really liked him because he didn't have a line. I mean, some of these college guys are so obnoxious. They have this big line about how wonderful they are. He was just, I am what I am. Take it or leave it, you know. And anyhow, that's how we reconnected, was when my father died. And I wrote and told him that I was working in this library in Salt Lake. Thanks for thinking of me. And I look up from the desk one day, and lo and behold, guess who's coming through the front door? His sister had some books that needed to be returned. She lived in Salt Lake, and so he returned his sister's books, and it was just like, well, I have to tell you about this. I told you about this other guy that I thought, oh, the school teacher, this is what I want, you know, I don't want anything to do with agriculture. Well, he proposed. I knew this was going to come, too, so I did some really hard praying about this. You know, I really like Jerry, but this guy's doing what I want to do with my life. My other good friend proposes, and I said, no, I think I'll marry Jerry. And he hadn't even asked me yet. It's kind of sad that it happened because my father had died that we reconnected. That's when he got back in touch with me. So we were engaged the 9th of September. It was about the 5th, no, toward the end of that month, his National Guard unit was called up because the Berlin Wall was being built. And they called up a whole bunch of Guard units and reserve units. And we decided we needed to get married before he left, hoping I could go with him. So we were married on the 4th of October in the Salt Lake Temple, and about 2 weeks later, we left for Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And that's where we honeymooned. In some really cruddy apartments, but it didn't matter. But there was a reserve unit went from Logan, and his Guard unit was from Salt Lake, and it was almost totally LDS. So we moved a whole branch back there, and I was called to be Relief Society secretary, which kind of amazed me because I'd never had any Relief Society experience. In those days, you could still be gleaners and mutual, beyond. And we just had good times. We went around and saw a lot of places.